Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Kat. I'm with the International Studies Association, and I'm just going to introduce this panel. Our event today is Reimagining Internationalism, Internationalization in International Studies, from Global Structures to Academic Responsibility. And I'm here with Simon Rushton from the University of Sheffield, Marianna Erodaichi. I'm sorry if I butchered that, Marianna, from Lincoln University, and Daniela Irrera from the School of Advanced Event Studies. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Marianna. And yeah, if you have any questions throughout the event, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A. And we'll have a short Q&A at the end of the session. Okay, Marianna, take it away.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank ISA for this invitation. I guess this is a highly critical question, one that speaks directly to the vulnerable position of today's education sector. And we are witnessing, I think, these challenges, not just in the UK, but also this applies to the context of the US and beyond. Today, we are, I think, being challenged to think differently. A potential answer is reimagining. To reimagining internationalization is moving maybe from the structure to the substance. It's not just about organizations, but also it's about the unit. It's not about numbers, but also I think it's about the purpose of our global engagement. So we must ask what kind of internationalization are we promoting as units, how we can contribute to a more just, sustainable world. But before that, I guess we need also to question who benefits from it. And this means that increasing students' mobilities or expanding networks might not be enough. Therefore, it becomes, I think, a way internationalization of reimagining how we study the world, not merely where we study it from. And in this context of meta-globalization, as I name it, where global connections, of course, are deepening, but also at the same time fragmenting, given the fact that inequalities, imbalances, fragmentation, nationalisms, or all phenomena that are being only intensified. I think today education, higher education, is both needs to think that is both shaped by, but also shaping these global transformations. And here I think is where the concept of responsible internationalization lies, because it suggests that not just universities, but also scholars are moral actors within it. And we hold this capacity to go beyond traditional forms and paradigms, I think, because to internationalize responsibly is basically to globalize consciously. So moving from maybe competition to collaboration to cooperation, as Simon will further explain, moving from prestige to purpose, as Daniela will reflect on, I think are instances that we need really to stay on. So I think this is directly connected to the idea of academic responsibility, and this is where academic responsibility comes in. So internationalization should not only be about expanding access, but I think it lies on deepening understanding, and it should engage with global challenges today, not as abstract problems that we just need to study, but I think as realities that they demand ethical collaboration and shared solutions. So academic responsibility means recognizing that knowledge production is not just neutral. And at these stages is that we need to rethink about metrics, about mere figures, recruitment figures, numbers, in order maybe to ask what we really commission in terms of novel production of knowledge. What do we offer beyond heteronomously defined maybe ideas? How theory and practice are relevant in relation to what is happening on the ground, and at the same time how all these, for instance, when it comes to the curriculum design, are able to be incorporated Many programs in international studies still reflect assumptions that they reflect old sort of patterns or perceptions that they are solid but unilateral. If we are serious about reimagining internationalization, I think we need to rethink not only who we collaborate with, but also what we teach, how we teach it. It means we recognize that theory itself is situated and that global learning maybe embraces more than a center of knowledge, uh, because we are indeed talking about multiple centers when we are talking about such a globalized sort of world. And in this case, I think we have another um, idea here that is to expand internationalization to, which is sort of maybe creating intercultural learning environment at home, spaces where diversity is not just represented, but also engaged with in a meaningful way. So basically, in other words, the internationalization is not only out there, but it's inside our classes, our institutions. And from a disciplinary perspective, I would say that international studies itself faces this moment of self-reflection. And in this age of meta-globalization, as at least I understand it, we need to interrogate all these traditional patterns and assumptions. So um, in this case, internationalization must be transformative, not transactional. It must align our scholarly practice with the values of justice, of sharing, of equity, not just merely maybe connecting the world, but understanding and improving it. And understanding maybe here might be the key to move from these global structures that we're talking about to this academic responsibility. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianna. So I'll jump in with a few comments at this point, and I'm going to talk, I think, in some ways, on a slightly more practical level, but trying to pick up on some of the ideas that Marianna just set out, and in particular, I suppose, reflect on some of my experiences um, over quite a number of years in thinking about research partnerships, and particularly internal research partnerships. And first, just to say something about myself and my own positionality. I mean, I'm a white British scholar working at a British university, but working primarily on research which is taking place in the global south in a variety of different countries that I will talk about later on. So first of all, just to say that that is something uh, which weighs on me, and is a kind of responsibility, I think. But it also means that international partnerships are an extremely important part of the way in which I've done research over many years. And I don't know how to do international partnerships well. I suppose what I'm going to do today is reflect on some of my experiences and some of my learning, but in the spirit of trying to open up a broader conversation within this webinar, about what makes for good, equitable, and productive international research partnerships. So I'm here to reflect on my experiences and what I've learned along the way, but certainly I'm not trying to set myself up as an expert in this, and I'm very aware that I'm coming at this from a particular perspective. I'm sure we have here in the webinar people working on very different kinds of research areas, at different levels, from people working on more global research down to national and community level research. So I'm sure I'm talking to an audience that has a vast diversity in the kinds of research you're doing. And that, of course, means that different kinds of partnerships are going to make sense for your research. So I'll be talking about my own research, but please try and translate that into your own realities and the kinds of partners that you might be working with. But assuming that international partnership is something that is interesting to you for your research, or something that you're already engaging with for your research, I want you to first think about why do we do that? Why do we create international partnerships for research, and what are the drivers of that? And I think, first of all, there are some very kind of pragmatic, I might even say instrumental drivers of partnership. So some funding schemes require you to have international partners, right? That's the most instrumental form of partnership building, I guess. You might need to be able to implement your research. You might need something from partners. It might be skills, it might be access to particular research sites, it might be language competency. There can be a whole range of different reasons why you might want to um, do research with partners. It might be also about pursuing impact from your research. How can you work with partners to disseminate your findings, to try and get those to audiences that might actually be able to create change in the real world? And while I think there's not anything that's kind of inherently wrong with these reasons for pursuing partnership, they are very instrumental reasons. And I think one of the things that I wanted to encourage in my comments today was thinking in a different way about partnerships, not so much why do I need partners for my research, but actually to think in a more collaborative way from the beginning about partnerships, to think about what can we do together that is better than what we could do alone. And I think that's quite a different way of thinking about why you might want to engage in an academic partnership, thinking about it as something that's less instrumental and more a kind of two-way relationship. So the remainder of my comments really are going to be thinking through what are some of the mechanics and what have I learned about creating those kinds of partnerships, which are hopefully more mutually supportive, mutually beneficial, and less instrumental than those funding or access or leverage driven ways of engaging in partnership. And I think this fits in with the wider agenda that Marianna was talking about around changing the way we do international studies. There's been a big movement, as you will all know, for decolonizing the discipline, and that means changing the ways in which we produce knowledge within our discipline and changing the ways in which we work. So, from my own experience, very briefly, I've worked on research in a number of different countries, mostly in recent years in Colombia and in Nepal, but also in a number of other countries, with a wide range of different kinds of partners, from NGOs to university partners to government agencies in some cases. And with some of those partners, I've worked on multiple projects over many years with the same partnerships and being able to build up relationships as a result of that. So all I wanted to do in the last few minutes really is just reflect on some things that I've learned from my partners as part of that process, and some of the things that I've learned both directly from the research projects that I've done with them, but also listening to them about their experiences more generally of working with international studies scholars on international research partnerships. And I've got, I think, a list of 5 things that I wanted to very briefly reflect on, and I'll just spend a minute on each, but I'm very happy to pick up on any of these in the Q&A if that's of interest to anybody. The first is about when partnerships start. And the number one complaint that I hear from my partners about researchers, so thinking about academic partners, for example, the number one complaint I hear is, oh, they want to add me to a project at the last minute. And I get an email from them saying, we're applying for this funding. The deadline is tomorrow. Please, will you be our in-country partner and give us a letter of support? And you'd be surprised how often that happens. And all of my partners have had that experience. And all of my partners absolutely hate that experience. And I think the first thing that I've learned is really the importance of engaging with your international partners long before the project starts, even before the project is designed, right? Getting to know each other, making sure that international partners are a full part of the process of scoping and designing and thinking through that research. That model in which partners are a kind of added for convenience at the end of a process of research design are not likely to work, but they're certainly not likely to be the basis of a good partnership. So that was the first thing, about involving partners from the very start of a research idea. Second thing I wanted to reflect on was about the importance of setting expectations and fulfilling them. And it's pretty routine, I think, in research partnerships, for one partner to complain about the other for not delivering the things they said they would do, or for being unreliable or not doing things on time. And I think, that's probably true in lots of cases, but it's also quite often, I think, reflects a kind of failure of setting realistic expectations, a failure of getting to know each other before the research project starts, a failure of being clear about roles and responsibilities. So I think the very beginning of a process of partnership, it's really important to set those expectations. What can each of the partners reasonably deliver? What kinds of support or resources do they need to be able to do those things? And how can we keep this partnership on track? And also, of course, to be really careful that you're fulfilling your expectations in the partnership. It's no good just blaming the other partners for not doing the things that you expect them to do if you're not doing those things yourself. So that's the second, is about kind of expectations and fulfilling them. The third thing I've learnt from working with partners over many years is about what an equitable division of labour looks like. And again, a really common complaint from partners, especially partners working in the global south, is the idea that somebody will come from a Western university, expect them to be data collectors, and they will then take that data and publish it and get all the glory for that research. And that's a really kind of, I would say, still too common, but very clearly kind of problematic and unequitable kind of division of labor. So part of project planning really needs to be about who does what, which, yes, it might be partly based upon geography, etc., but it also needs to be based upon skills, resources, knowledge, and not assuming that one set of partners are the kind of data collectors and another set of partners are the real experts on these things. I think that's a kind of very problematic, but as I said, all too common form of partnership. Also thinking, what are you offering to your partners, not just what are they offering to you? And that might be professional development opportunities, it might be funds, it might be training or mentoring, a whole range of different things. The fourth thing I wanted to think about, and I think where partnerships often founder, is around finances and making sure that finances are dealt with in ways that are equitable. And really often, again, I hear partners in the global south uh, dissatisfied that they feel like they're not getting a fair share of the resources for a particular project. Quite often those things are limited not only by funding scheme rules, but also by universities' own finance rules, and they can be really difficult things to navigate. But what I would say is that the kind of financial arrangements for a research project really do need to reflect the division of labour that I spoke about in the last point, and really make sure that the partners are getting the resources they need to be able to do the parts of the project that are down to them. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was about the different incentive structures that different partners might have in a research project. And I think this particularly can be an issue when academic partners are working with non-academic partners, for example, people from NGOs or governments or so on. For us on the academic side, it's very often publications or the next grant are the things that are the incentive structures. But it's really important to understand each other's incentive structures and to realize they may not be the same things for your partners. It might not be that academic publications are the things that matter to them. It might be, and if it is, then of course it's essential to ensure that partners get equal opportunities to be part of those things. But it may not be. It may be that your partner values the resources. It may be that they value the findings of the research and they have particular uses for those. It may be that they see this particular project as a stepping stone towards something else. So really, I think putting those incentive structures on the table and having those shared, and those understandings shared from the very beginning is essential. So there's 5 things that I wanted to reflect on around the beginning of partnerships from the very beginning, about setting and fulfilling expectations, about thinking about division of labor, thinking about division of finance, and thinking about and understanding each other's incentive structures. And I think international partnerships are not just professional relationships, they're social relationships, and that means that they take a lot of effort to grow and to nurture and to sustain. And I think that's, for me, really core to the spirit of partnership, is thinking about them in those multi-directional social ways rather than in the kind of instrumental ways that I outlined at the beginning. So thanks for listening. I will stop there and hand over to Daniela.
Thank you very much. So I will follow on adding my my reflections, and of course I would like to thank ISA for always supporting this kind of discussions that are very, very relevant for everyone in the field. Well, I would like to focus a little bit more on membership and also the role of associations in respect to this academic responsibility and also the internationalization processes and what can be done to improve the membership and the benefit of membership. My perspective is based on the work that I'm doing as chair of the CPR, as a European Consortium for Political Research. There was a big challenge because it's a huge association. Basically it includes several disciplines, but international relations, international studies are not the first one, let's say. So, and I am an international relations scholar, so I'm very, very, it's very important for me. And it has been always very Eurocentric. So you may immediately figure out the challenges that the CPR is facing. And the first keyword I would like to use is emphasize the reimagining, which is part of the title. And most importantly, reinvent or readapt to this current reality and the current situation, because many things have changed in the international studies community, as a profession, as scholars, as in teaching, in research, in public impact, in relationship with institutions, with political institutions, but also relations with the universities, and also the necessity to study, as Simon was saying, to have partnership, but also to study very top topics that are becoming more and more sensitive. So the whole landscape has completely changed, and associations have to adapt accordingly if they want to emphasize and give meaning to membership. I mean, the point is, what is the sense of being member of an association today? What is the benefit? So the first keyword was adaptation, and so the second word would be belonging to something, because although everything is changing, my own impression as a professor of international relations in an institution which is based in Rome, so very central in the capital, but also facing many sensitive issues, I'm feeling sometimes very alone. So the need to interact more with my colleagues, the need to build more partnerships, but also more consortium that can be useful for research, but also for teaching or for exchanging experiences. So the point is to emphasize more networking, but creating a networking which is more helpful and more supportive to members, because this is the point. We need to have more support and more help, and also more interaction. So it's not just being members and going to events, participating to events, or having the chance to discuss a paper and receive feedback, so which is obviously very, very relevant. It is still very relevant, but also there is a need to interact more with other colleagues and to deal with other colleagues on specific purposes and issues that we have in common. And this is very important for young researchers because they have to grow and develop their career, but it is also very important for senior researchers like me that we can consider ourselves already consolidated from the point of view of the career, being professor, but at the same time, we are facing many challenges. So this is something that I believe is becoming more important, and it is a concern for all associations that I've just sent a message to Kim from IPSA, and this is a concern that we also share with BISA, with ISA, and many other associations. So we all share the same concerns. As for the few more issues that I would like to put on the table, always from the point of view of a big association that is trying to offer more and to adapt to the challenges. The need to interest as many people as possible, and the need to interest to represent more scientific disciplines and scientific interest as many as possible. This is becoming very, very, very difficult because all events are becoming very big. And there's the need for scholars to being supported and being helped in order to interact, to participate. And this is something that all associations are experiencing. It's not so easy to have panels and roundtables or professional panels or other kind of, let's say, creative slot during conferences in order to represent all interests, in order to give a voice to everyone. And especially as Simon was sharing his an expertise and his experience in the global south, and this also happened to me because my field of research is non-state actors, and particularly armed non-state actors. So I'm studying particularly in Northern Africa or the Middle East. So the more I interact with people, the more I discovered that there's a world of scholars that would love to interact more. So the need to bring more, and I don't like to use the word global south. I mean, I would prefer to use the label non-European, but from different regions of the world, because there's a rich variety of approaches and alliances that can be created. So the point is how to make what we can offer today more inclusive, more international, more open to a non-European context. So this is a joke I usually do with the members of the executive committee, that I say that the CPR should go global more and more. And they say that I say this because I am an international relations scholar. Probably it is true, but the problem is that we need to go beyond Europe. I understand that the main tradition has been grounded on Stein-Rockan tradition on the European one, but at the same time we need to develop more and more, so that we need to offer more opportunities, and I'm not only referring to events, but also to what ACPR usually offers, which is like being members of standing groups or publishing. So we have several journals and also a blog that is working very well, and they are now open to open access, to offer a method school, especially for young researchers, to open and to offer all these tools to everyone. And what we are also trying to do is to identify a way to globalize our membership and to try to offer more and more to people that may be interested. And the last point that I would like to put on the table is the more we go global and the more we would like to discuss sensitive topics, the more academic freedom is challenged. So when a few years ago we started to let's say to manage this important issue within a CPR, and so for the first time we created a working group, and we started to learn from other associations that were much more implemented tools like IPSA, for example. So we discovered that with a large community of scholars like the one in the CPR, but also a large community of scholars that expands every time we have an event, because the event is open also to non-members. And well, we have panels, roundtables, discussions, plenaries, and so on. Every time we need to respect different views, different ideas, also to welcome scholars and colleagues that may be challenged or they don't have the chance to freely discuss their topics in their own universities or in their own context. So this is something that is becoming more important, more and more important, and this is also part of the reimagining process in international studies, because it's impossible to deepen any internationalization process without considering that academic freedom is becoming one of the main concerns. It is not only related to non-democratic context and so, scholars coming from, let's say, troubled context, but it's also happening more and more in Europe. In particular, this is also linked to democracy and to the crisis that democracy is living. So in the end, just to summarize, the role of associations is more important now, I believe, because there is a need to support scholars, the need to support young researchers, but also senior researchers, and to make this international environment being more inclusive and also more open and more respectful, and in a way also try to make it an ideal environment for people who cannot really express their opinions to make it. And I will stop here. Thank you.
I think we have plenty of time now for comments or questions, and there's a Q&A function down at the bottom of the screen which you can feel free to use, or the chat function.
I think there is one maybe message from an early career researcher that I think, Simon, somehow links to what you were talking about. And
Okay,
maybe,
so yeah.
And if Dr. Dufferin would like to also intervene with a comment, since you have 30 years of experience on that, and he has left a comment for us, then
Okay,
that would...
fine. So I can see Saeed's message in the chat. So Saeed's an early career researcher in international studies at a university in India, in critical security studies, peace studies, and international politics. Keen to undertake collaborative research and looking for opportunities. I mean, I think this. So I don't know the answer, particularly, Saeed, to who would be the right partners for your work, but I do think that raises a more general issue about how do you find partners in the first place, and how do you find the right partners for the kinds of work that you're interested in doing. And that's not an easy process, and it's a process in which I guess there's a certain amount of luck and a certain amount of being in the right place at the right time. I suppose all I could say, reflecting on the development of my own partnerships, are really about finding people who are working on the same issues that you're interested in, and getting in touch with them. And I think that's probably the only way you can do it. I mean, what I would say, Saeed, is many people working at universities in whichever countries are looking for partners. So I don't think you should worry about approaching people whose work has been influential on you and who you'd be interested in collaborating with.
Yeah, maybe Thomas can be promoted to speaker so he can intervene. Yeah, I can see as Wesley
Okay, great.
hand. Thomas.
Yeah. Right. Hello. Greetings to everyone. Thank you for your contributions. So as I said in the chat, I run an institute that deals with peace studies, but also comparative global philosophy. It was set up at the University of London back in the 90s. And I want to raise the issue of peace in relation to the galaxy of international studies. We live in a world of the Ukraine-Russia war, Gaza, etc. And to me, it's a stain on all our consciences that we're not doing more. I rather resent the way peace studies was sort of stuck in a ghetto. Oh, that's a little minority interest. You know, real scholarship is about, you know, defense, international relations and stuff. I encountered that attitude at the University of London. I spoke to the professor of war studies saying, hey, do you want to help? And he said, no, I'm not going to study peace. It doesn't exist. War's real. That's what I study. So he has a huge empire doing war studies. My concern is that for the last 20 years, we've failed to really bridge this gap between the realist schools of international relations who've led directly to Trump, Netanyahu, Putin, who divorce ethics from the way we see the world. And I would like to ask each of our panel speakers, how can we put peace thinking, peace research, peace, you know, what more can we do to actually right this wrong and have influence in the corridors of power? Why isn't there a minister of peace in Whitehall in every European government, you know? Okay, there's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe I can start answering. Thank you very much, Thomas. You know, I feel very much impressed by your question, and I would like to immediately to react because I teach at the School of Advanced Defense Studies, which is a national defense university in Italy, and so I'm also coming from an experience of a peace researcher because I was also part of the European Peace Research Associations and mainly work on non-state actors, which are positive non-state actors and NGOs, humanitarian NGOs, and now I ended up in armed non-state actors, but always having a look from the peace research. Yeah, it is true that we are failing in developing more, which can, I mean, from theoretical and empirical work that can be more relevant in comparison to the realist perspective, which has always been dominant. And I'm afraid in a debate in Europe now, so the problem is dichotomy between defensive or offensive approach in respect to the European defense. I mean, the point is, if we are discussing about bringing peace in areas in which there are conflicts, and we want to bring peace to Gaza and Ukraine, but also there are many other conflicts that we didn't talk enough, let's say. There is no discussion about actors that are on the field. There is no discussion on the different approaches that can be developed, but there's a lot of discussion on to what extent EU and European member states can defend themselves and how they can increase military spending. So as you said, a minister of peace in each European state, that would be ideal. And in the end, if we look at how things have worked in Europe after the Second World War, Europe never had an offensive approach. They mainly invested. They invested very little money in military spending, and it was mainly peacekeeping operations. But still, they didn't invest the same amount of money in the humanitarian approach and in humanitarian interventions. I mean, from the, let's say, the civilian side. So not only we are failing to bridge this gap, but I think that right now the main discussions are too much focused on military spending and how we as Europeans can defend ourselves without dealing too much with the US and NATO. And the debate about humanitarian action is still, limited to the usual suspects, which are like NGOs and those few scholars that are studying NGOs. So I haven't seen any specific step forward in these last years from this. So the point is that it will be necessary to strengthen the peace research community or the international relations community that is more working on non-state actors and in conflict resolution from this perspective. That is my initial reaction.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
Hi, thank you for your question. I think, I will talk as a scholar, regardless of the institution I represent, and regardless, I guess, from the background. Maybe you can agree that background of an individual is shaping understandings. But I think if we start from the general, we as scholars and how we sort of contribute, because we clearly talk about impact. What's the impact really? I think is somehow reflected on what I tried to say before, that the point is not just to connect the world, but understanding is a very important, I think, element. And when we talk about understanding, obviously, we are talking about understanding that of the product that we're trying to produce, which is basically the knowledge. What do we offer? How this is heteronomously defined, or it's really representing our own understanding from a reality that it is going on, that it is out there. And I think when we are doing that from a position of oneself, rather than being sort of like dragged by stereotypes, by maybe a need in certain cases to represent a certain sort of centers. And of course, I don't talk about centers of knowledge, which is very much important to be able to incorporate and reflect on, but I'm talking about, broadly speaking, not being able to overcome assumptions. Either we talk about Eurocentrism, or we're talking about the Anglo-Saxon sort of frame, or anything that it goes beyond basically preset frames that they are existing until today. And in this now world, you, Thomas, and many others are referring to as a failure, only because we were not able maybe to sort of overcome all these traditional models, because in reality there is resistance to these models, even when it comes to the knowledge production, to the research, to what we argue. And these has resulted into these deeper inequalities that we're talking about. Either we talk about space, or we're talking about perspectives and approaches. So it's different when we are trying, I think, to pursue something for the sake of doing that, and abstractly maybe try to address sort of subject matters. And it's different when there is an ethical sort of drive in what we do. So we move away from the prestige of the institutions, we move away maybe from this sort of like competition of production, and we shift towards purpose, towards more sort of collaborative spirit, as we said. But collaboration maybe means nothing if there is no self-reflection, as the discipline needs to do, in oneself, and maybe rethink as to why we're doing it, for what purpose, and who is the recipient, who do we benefit. So if there is no this self-reflection, how on a broader level and in more sort of like context of hardcore politics, we expect in a sort of top to bottom approach things to improve, if we as units, maybe to certain instances, we replicate traditional paths. And this is not for the sake of being resisting or resistant to what is out there, but maybe because the era now has overcome us. It supersedes everything, and we have to run faster.
And maybe I'll just give a very brief reflection to Thomas, and then pick up on Karzan's comment in the chat. So, I mean, Daniela and Marianna have already said a lot in terms of your question, Thomas. I suppose the one thing I would add is international relations as a discipline, in my view, has tended to be focused on states, and maybe that sounds obvious in that that's what international relations started as, and certainly, it's international relations can be read as the relations between states, and certainly states at the moment are not particularly receptive to the kinds of messages that you are, and I am also trying to promote around the need for peace. I think one of my reflections that I wanted to add is international relations as a discipline has not always been very interested, and this has changed, and this is continuing to change, I think, has not always been very interested at looking at what's happening below the level of the state, and particularly what's happening at the level of communities, right? And I think my response to your question would be that peace is built and sustained at the level of communities, and we've not, as a discipline, always been very good at engaging in those processes. And I think it's something which is changing slowly, but we could still do more to change. I wanted to briefly also pick up on Karzan's comment in the chat, who is talking about the BISA. So for those of you not familiar, that's the British International Studies Association conference, to which Karzan has submitted an abstract and is asking us to allow scholars from the Middle East to take part in those activities. I thought I'd respond to that because I happen to be the BISA conference chair for next year. I wanted to respond to you, Karzan, but I also wanted to use that as a way of raising a different question about internationalization. So, of course, we are really happy to have participation of scholars from the Middle East in that conference, and we have a huge number of international delegates attend that conference, as do ISA with their annual conference and the other professional associations. I was trying to find, while Marianna was talking, the number of countries that were represented at the BISA conference last year, and I couldn't find it in my email, but it was something like scholars from 50 different countries. So we certainly welcome scholars from the Middle East, but there are structural problems which make that kind of mobility difficult, right? And I think these are things that professional associations, including BISA and ISA and ECPR and others, struggle with. They include the cost of conference attendance for international scholars, but also the visa regimes which many countries have in place. And I think that's been a constant source of frustration for many of us involved in putting on international conferences, that sometimes even when we do try to encourage scholars from overseas, and even when we do manage to find money for travel grants and scholarships and so on, sometimes the visa process prevents those scholars from attending. And I think that is a great impediment to the internationalization of our discipline.
Right, am I allowed to make a supplementary comment? Sort of, it's a kind of a question comment. I mean, just to thank you all for your replies, and they're all important. And I just wanted to tack on something. So I think I found the solution. I'm going to answer my own question. What more can we do, right? I've been working on trying to create a European Union mediation service for the last 15 years and beating my head against a brick wall, not least because of Brexit. I discovered something recently called the European Space Agency, which still includes the UK and all the other European countries. And it does marvelous collaborative scientific work, high level stuff. I've thought of this plan. I'm calling it the European Peace Agency, which would be modeled on the European Space Agency. It will include Britain and all the other member states of the ES, of the European Space Agency. And it would have the same budget. The European Space Agency has a budget of £7 billion a year. Sounds like a lot, but it's, and it's worth investing. We can study the universe, how galaxies form. I reckon we should, as a continent, be spending £7 billion a year on studying where is peace? How can we find it? What is it? What is it in human nature that creates war? So that's my latest project. I will keep you informed. And I'm proposing it should be based in Dublin, which has just voted in a peace president, is a neutral, non-aligned state. And I think it'd be a brilliant location for a European peace agency with a budget of £7 billion a year. So there's a bit of a news flash, and I will let people know if they're interested. Yeah, I think it's anyway. I think it's a good idea, and you heard it here first.
Great, thanks, Thomas, and yeah, more power to your elbow, and yeah, everybody look out for developments on that. Thank you. I don't see any other questions in the Q&A or comments in the chat right now, so we might draw this session to a close. Marianna?
Yeah, sure.
I dropped some links in the chat if you're interested in other upcoming events with ISA. We also have our newsletter that has information on all our upcoming events, gets sent out at the beginning of the month. And then our Early Career Scholar Network, which is a new initiative for resources for early career scholars. But if there's any final questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. Thank you for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Just let me add that it is essential to have, events that are jointly organized and managed by people from different associations, because we are sharing the same problems and we can have solutions, so collective solutions, so that we need more.
Well, if anyone has an idea for event, always feel free to contact us at programming@isanet.org. I just dropped that email in the chat as well.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
You too, thank you. Bye-bye.